Hello, friends. My name is Emily Platzer. I'm going to be presenting on a way of collaborating with several people. There are definitely multiple ways of collaborating and a lot of different ideas out there. These are some ideas that really worked for me. It's inspired by someone asking me a question: how do you run your teams? You seem to get so much done, there's not a lot of bugs. And I started to write down how we developed our process and what we did together, which became a little zine. And I started sharing it with people, and people in my company were so excited about it that I decided to actually publish it. So I have books about, I just had a book about developing software, and this is a talk based on some of those ideas. So when you're developing software as a single person, it's so easy to just throw some stuff together and keep track of everything. Maybe have a test suite, but you can fit everything in your mind. As you start to add developers and project managers and people who are invested in it as well, designers, user researchers, it becomes even more and more complicated to collaborate together. So some things can really help you decide how to do your collaborative work. The Agile Manifesto, I'm sure that we've all heard of, possibly have read, possibly have memorized. It can be really helpful, but as certain Twitter personalities have pointed out, there are some caveats with that. It doesn't work for everybody. There's a lot of assumed privilege that might help with that manifesto, and I'll touch on that a little bit as well. Deciding what MVP means is really important, because it's not the thing that the investor is wanting to create. That's not an MVP. That can help you find your MVP, but it's not a decision that someone makes. It's something that you all have to come to together. And then what is your business hypothesis, and how are you going to test it? Finding your business hypothesis is really important. And then making sure that you're testing your business hypothesis to make sure that you are addressing the right questions is also important. So just things to keep in mind as you're developing. And then the actual steps we're going to take, or we're going to also cover, and that's in Inception, iteration planning or iteration planning meetings, sometimes sprint planning, design and development, which happens throughout the process, and then demos and retros. So we'll just give a basic outline of what that looks like. So the Agile Manifesto was something that came out and really transformed a lot of the ways that people wanted to build software, the way that they work together. Coming out of the Waterfall Process into Agile, and then Big Agile, and then No XP, some of these things are really helpful to bring together at the same time. But this is the Agile Manifesto, created by these people, following their guidelines here. But as Ron Jeffries noted, this is written by 17 Agile Whiteman. As we start to implement things, just understand that things that have always worked for you might not hold true as you build more diverse teams. So just keep in mind that things that have always worked for people might not work as you change teams and as you are bringing in new members. So what is MVP? As I said, it's not a decision that someone makes. An MVP is something that you will create. It is also every step in the process. So something that I really like to say is, with everything that you implement, you're always done, but you're also never done. So you always want to have something complete be delivered to master or to production. You want to make sure that it is always delivering value to the end user, and you also want to make sure that it's ready for extension. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You don't want to grind your development process to a halt because you're not taking care of the sustainability of the development of the app. So balancing complete and ready for extension it's a balance, and it's hard sometimes to figure out which way you're leaning and how to correct. And this is kind of a famous bit of stuff out there, but this is more like a waterfall process. If you want to build something that will get you from A to B, if someone decides what the MVP is, then it's going to be harder for them to have something that's useful and complete at every step unless they think about building something more like this, where every commit that you're shipping, if your company ran out of money, which is probably in some cases improbable, in some cases more probable, but if your company completely ran out of money, they can continue to use this application and continue to make money and really think about what their next steps could be. So it's a really important way to like break down your features, break down your stories, and make sure that you're always delivering that value. So as you're thinking about your big, expensive features, try to think about how you can break down those big, expensive features into smaller things that are less expensive to implement. Put them out there in front of users and see if that's solving the complete problem. Perhaps you overestimated the complexity of the feature that's going to solve all the users' problems. So just remember to make things cheap, put it out there, and so you'll be able to learn from it and pivot as you need to. What is your business hypothesis? So think about, there's the classic Zappos story, which I'll tell you again if you haven't heard it. But the classic Zappos story is there was a gentleman who thought that people would like to buy shoes online. And instead of creating an entire web app that could handle all sorts of traffic and all sorts of inventory, he went to a local shoe store, took some pictures, put them on the internet, didn't buy the shoes. If the shoes sold, he went back to the store, bought them, and then shipped them out. So it was a very cheap way to see if this was a sustainable business plan. So just think about how you can create cheap features to see if your business hypotheses are going in the right direction. So now we're going to go through the actual steps. We'll look at the top and then I'll explain the bottom a little more thoroughly. So there's the inception or re-inception for existing products. And that happens more rarely. It's once every 6 months, maybe once every year, depending on how in-depth your inception can be. And of course, you do whatever is right for your team and right for your process. And then we have the main body of those sprints, which is iteration planning, which happens every 2 weeks or once a sprint. I do 2-week sprints. Design and development all the time. Demo at the end of every sprint, 2 weeks for me. And then a retro right after demo. And those are sprint retros. You can also have bigger retros that cover like an inception process. You can have retros after the inception to find out ways to improve your inception process. Retros are really great. So let's look at this little calendar thing. The way that we have found the easiest cadence to do is the Thursday, like 2 Thursdays before, you're getting your next sprint ready. So you can see here, this IPM for next sprint. This sprint, we already had that. It was quite a while ago. And you really want to do that so that you have time to ruminate on all of those stories that you've talked about, so that your developers and your team are all thinking about problems and subconsciously perhaps. But you want to start, I like to start on a Monday. Your sprint starts on a Monday. Development really has been happening from the last demo, code freeze. That Wednesday, the tech lead preps about 2 sprints of stories, just in case your velocity is a little bit more than you thought it would be. You'll have plenty of work for people to do. Then you do your iteration planning meeting for the subsequent sprint. Really, the tech lead is always a little bit ahead, and no one else really needs to prepare for those meetings. You just want to make sure that everything's kind of ready for people to think about and break down. On that Tuesday, you'll have a code freeze at the end of the day for that demo. There might be still stuff going into master that's not getting shipped to production or your demo application. But you really want to make sure that the demoer has plenty of time to click on all the things. Then the demo prepares. They might reorder stories that have been delivered to make sure that they have this really nice story that they can tell while clicking through the app to make it easier for everyone to understand. And then on Thursday, you have a demo and the retro. And then everyone else is kind of free to like have a Friday and maybe go home early, but they're not like gearing up towards that last Friday. And then the acceptance by the business lead or whoever is in charge of saying, yes, this fits the acceptance criteria, just has till the end of that day on Friday to give any feedback. Does anyone have any questions on that cadence? We can talk about it more if you would like later. All right, so the inception. It's really important to have everyone in one location. I've been in inceptions where somebody was remote, and quite a few people were like, who is that guy? Like, why is he on the phone? Like, why is he here? There was such an obvious disparity between the community that was being created in that inception and like that guy who was calling in. So it's like part of inception is to become like a team and to become a group, and it's really hard. But inceptions are only once every 6 months. So just fly everybody in, get everyone together, make sure you're in the same room. You really want to create a strong team together, and so it's really important to spend a little bit of time. So we have a couple people in here. You might have more, you might have less, depending on how big your team is. But you'll have your product owners, or your business lead, startup lead. You'll have your Agile project manager. They're the person who communicates between all of the different entities and also schedules all the things and really helps with when problems arise. Sorry, project managers, that was my beating of the heart. They make everyone's life really great. The developers, possibly a lead developer with other developers, a designer, possibly a lead designer with other designers or UX people. User researchers are fantastic if you can throw those in the mix. And then anyone else who might be a subject matter expert, but basically if you're not in the room, you don't get to weigh in. So it's really important to be there. So for the inception, the most important thing we want to answer is what are we going to build? What do we want to make? What do the users need? And what hypothesis are we testing? And we kind of want to keep that little, what hypothesis are we testing? As a little thread that is always in your mind. You also need to really create a supportive space where people aren't afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense to you, it might be because it doesn't make sense. So you really need to ask those brave questions so that everyone can be on the same page. There's pictures of people who are all thinking about the product, and one is like a square, and one's a rectangle, and one's a circle, and one's a spiral. And if they start talking about it, then those shapes of what they think they're going to build are going to come out. And you really need to get consensus, especially when you're in the same room. Because if you can't get consensus in the same room, it's going to be impossible to do during development. So just do it. Just be brave. You only have to be brave for maybe 2 days, and then you can go back to being scared and not talking. Maybe. I don't know. All right. So for the inception, this is an outline of some of the activities that I like to do. The facilitator is the Agile project manager. They usually tend to be good at that anyways. Thank goodness for Agile project managers. The business lead or the product owner will give an overview of their vision. And at any time, there's a risks and assumptions board. Anytime you hear something that sounds like a risk or anything that sounds like an assumption, we know everybody likes this, then you write it down. We know everybody hates this, then you write it down. We know we're going to need this, then you write it down. The user personas are created. This is collaborative, and it's led by the designers or the user researchers. The user workflows are created together as a team. Everybody in Inception participates. It's led by the designers and user researchers. Creating stories, my favorite part. Maybe my second favorite, because prioritizing stories is really exciting too. Are done by the development lead or leads. Then you prioritize the stories. Those are usually done on sticky notes, and so that's going to really help you make smaller features. And then with a piece of masking tape, you decide how many stories you want to allow in your backlog, and that's how many the business leader, product owners are allowed to put above the line. So they'll start ordering things. You can use epics if you want to group things, and then you can order those epics, which can kind of help silo your concerns and your areas of thought. Sometimes, if you're out of time, just prioritize them. And then everyone reviews the list of risks and assumptions together. An Agile project manager can lead that, and you just kind of want to document it and keep it in mind. Another really important part is having fun together. Again, you want to come together as a team. It's really important, especially if you have remote people, that everyone really gets a chance to talk to each other and develop that community feeling while you're actually in the same room. It's going to really help your project. All right, so the iteration planning. There's actually pre-planning that happens by the tech lead. They're going to read through 2 sprints worth of stories, at least 1.5, just in case the velocity picks up. Breaking them down, putting in their best guess of acceptance criteria, really trying to think about what the startup leads want and channeling that out and writing down as much as you can in a succinct, easily digestible format. You don't want to be too wordy, because otherwise no one will read it. Then the actual planning meeting. Everyone kind of reviews the stories, the order, make sure that nothing's out of order, like this actually has to land before this, so these need to be switched around. Talking about ways that things are interdependent and who might want to pick things up. And then you also might play point poker, where everyone that's at this meeting, designers, project managers, startup leads if they would like, can play point poker for each story. So you say, all right, user can log in, 1, 2, 3. However many points is like the average take of the room, then you can put that in. If there's like glaring errors, that's subjective. If there's glaring discrepancies, then you might want to say, you said 3, everyone else said 2. Are we missing something? Or maybe everyone said 3 and somebody said 1. Have you done this before? Is this easier than we think? So some of those questions and those discussions can really find out, like, oh, you're assuming that we're integrating with all of this stuff. We're assuming we're not quite yet. So those discussions and that point poker can help expose some of those things. I like to use 1, 2, and 3. 5 and 8 mean it needs to be broken out. It might be an epic there. So I like to throw in all my stories within these design tag, and then designers can pull that tag and add links to things. And that way they can quickly see where they need to design, put up wireframes, etc., or talk to other parties to find out what needs to happen for those stories to get underway. Developers just pick a story that's at the top of the backlog. Unless there's been some discussion about somebody who would like to pick up a certain story, you usually just work from top to bottom. You start the story, you pull down master, you run all the tests, you check out a branch, you write a happy path, you implement it, you commit with a descriptive commit message. Maybe mirroring the story name, especially for the first one. Just say exactly what it is. Thank you for the last talk. Git is my flavor. I love Git. Yes, I can talk about it for a long time. Then you start a PR. I like to start a PR immediately once I have any complete-ish body of work. Toss it up to GitHub, start a PR, put a work in progress tag on it, and people can start seeing where your direction is. Especially if you're more of a junior, then you can say, hey everybody, I'm starting this PR, let me know what you think about it, I'm going to be working on it for the next day. And they can immediately start giving feedback. And also then you can not worry about messing up your computer and losing work. So once you have that happy path up, sad path test, writing a unit test you might need, using your test for factor clarity, keeping it ready for extension, and then you just push it up make sure everything's cool. Pivotal tracker, I left that in there. I do love pivotal tracker. And then add I like to immediately add any new environmental variables that are there, especially if it's not going to break anything. Do everything you can at your demo or prod site that you can ahead of time. Obviously, you can't do migrations, but otherwise, you really want to get it ready. When you merge the PR, either the reviewer can merge it if they feel comfortable. If they think that there's too much going on with migrations and EMVs, and I don't know, I might have to turn something on at AWS, then they can request the code author merge that PR and make sure that everything is kosher. You want to make sure, before you click delivered, and before you tell whoever is going to look at this for acceptance and rejectance that it's ready, you really want to watch it green, watch the test pass on a continuous integration. You want to watch the deploy. You want to make sure EMVs are set. You want to do all your migrations, seeds for demo, click all around anywhere you think that your code might have had an effect, and just some basic stuff. Can you still log in? That's kind of important. And then once it's reviewed, I do like the squash and merge because I have a team that loves the merge workflow locally, so that's how we balance that out. I know. There's some fights to fight sometimes. We'll get there. So for the demo, we talked a little bit about this. The stories are reordered in a way that it's very easy to tell a story. Sometimes the way that they land in your project management tool is not an easy way to tell a story. Then you want to set up the basic state of the app. I really like having seeds that you constantly kind of massage to be able to tell the right story for the features that you're demonstrating. And so that you don't have to create new objects or whatever in the database when that's not really what you're showcasing. Do a practice run, maybe out loud in private, because the cadence of you speaking out loud is completely different than the cadence of you inside your head. And also you'll practice using the right words and it'll just flow a little bit better, especially if it's your first couple demos. For your practice run, you still haven't gotten to the demo, click on every single thing that you're going to demo. If you click on extra stuff during your demo, your probability, I don't know, there's like fairies or elves or something that just like really kind of like throw stuff in there to where that's when you're gonna find your bug. And the last project that I was the tech lead on had 0 bugs. And it wasn't because, we were pretty great. But the most important part is that when that demoer was clicking on every single thing, they found bugs and they would undeliver that story. That's all it takes, is just really a patient person who's going through everything that's gonna demo, undelivering that story because it's not finished. Then when you're done practicing, you reset the basic state of the app. Maybe you just run your seeds, maybe there's a little bit more complication there, and then you demo. For your demo, you read every story. If there's a whole lot, maybe you read them in batches, but you just want to make sure that people have an outline of what they're supposed to be looking for. Then you demo each story in order, and you state which story it's related to, so they have a mental reminder that everything looked so good. And then after, you go back to your project management software, and you reread the stories, and you remind people, especially if it's a little bit longer. And then you can also, another benefit of rereading the stories is you're like, oh, I forgot to demo that one thing. You can see what you skipped. Ask if anyone would like to see anything else. Hopefully those little fairy elves won't mess you up too bad. But if they do, that's great, because you can undeliver it and then you can redo it. Then you remind everybody of their next steps. And then you retro, which is one of my favorite things. Retros should be held for each sprint and each major release. It's a really good way of getting a temperature check on how your team is really doing. Because as stress escalates, if you don't have those retros, you're not going to really know how to address it. You're just going to feel it. And that feeling, it doesn't feel good. So those are best held in person, but on distributed teams, that's pretty impossible. So just either like a really nice, clear picture of the whiteboard, or you can whiteboard live and have someone typing at the same time for people who are remote and like if the resolution isn't as good. But it's really nice to physically do it together. It's a good time to have fancy drinks. Someone mentioned for their retros, they assign someone to show how to make a fancy drink together, and they all share it, which is really lovely. So one person leads the retro, and I like to call it the instrument of the room. They're not really there to translate things in a nice way or a bad way or in their way, really. So you really want to capture what other people are saying. And making sure that people are being kind, honest, and inclusive, and supporting that feeling of psychological safety. Action items are really important here. We like to assign them, and then afterwards, either the Agile project manager or the team lead will make sure that that's documented specifically and sent out to people who have volunteered or been voluntold that they're going to resolve those action items. So this is one way, not the way, but one way of collaborating on software. As your team changes, your process is going to need to change too, and you really have to listen to your team. One person on is a new team, one person off is another new team. So really just like, be open to change. This is roughly where I start, and it seemed to be a good process for lots of different people. But really just remember to be kind to each other, and you'll find it a little bit easier. Thanks. Hi, yes. Right, so the number of people that are invited to the Inception. So it depends on the size of your room. And you might choose the room also that's the right size for the people. But I like to have at least your leads, so one tech lead, one design lead, hopefully a user researcher, and a couple other designers, developers. The product lead and the Agile project manager is like minimum. You need like those people who are all going to be at the demo is a minimum. But I would say like once it gets to like 20, it's harder to have those communications where like people aren't talking over each other. So just really think about your core group, adding another person maybe for them if they can get another person for their team from each of those departments, just so that they're not alone in their concerns about user research is really important. No, it's really important. Or like this is going to be really expensive feature to implement. You want to have backup for those people. So I would say like one of each of those, and then backups if you can get them. Or the whole team if you can get it in there. It's not too many. Yeah.
So who should normally write the stories? Like, who should normally write the stories? The developer or product manager? How do you?
Yeah. So the way that
details of stories, I guess.
Yeah. I should have repeated the question. Did I repeat the question? Maybe. So the question this time was, who writes the stories? I like to write. When I'm a tech lead on my projects, I like to write the stories. It takes a lot of imagination and patience to break down big features into smaller one-day-ish features. That doesn't mean they're required to be finished in one day, but it's like the smallest thing you can do. And it's really difficult, if you're not a developer, to know how to break that down. So sometimes I'll, especially if I'm trying to get more tech lead experience with other developers, I'll bring them in and have them work with me. But it does take a lot of patience and creativity to break those down into complete and valuable and ready for extension type of stories. I mean, it is kind of typing from the inception, but then you also do a little bit of massaging after that too.
I was just going to ask about, you asked if we had questions on the schedule and thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
Just sort of looking at that and just wondering like how it goes really
Yeah.
with having something not accepted, but yet maybe after the demo, then there's three days there that what would the developers be doing? Do they start on the next sprint?
Yeah, they're working constantly. And you don't, as a developer, or on the teams that I've led, as a developer, you don't really pay attention to anything. You just are working as much as you can, as thoughtfully as you can, trying to limit your scope, etc. But on this day, you just make sure that you don't merge to master, or you don't merge and push to your demo site, because every code that's or every story that's finished after this, it's just kind of like in limbo until after the demo. Because you just want to make sure that everything's clicked on and solid, and you don't want anything slipping in that hasn't really been fully vetted by the demoer. Because you want to make sure that they feel confident showing bug-free code.
Then I'm just wondering, do you do stand-ups in this
Yep.
thing? Okay.
Every day. Yeah. I should have put that in. I might write that down. But I missed that. But yeah, stand-ups every day. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are there things that you've done that you think help foster that kind of inclusive environment to make things, people feel a little more interested in participating?
Yeah. I worked with a lot of offshore developers, and it was very difficult for them to open up and talk about or have questions, or like, but what about this? And so I sort of like showed them how to do it by doing it myself, by calling out when I made mistakes, or when someone else had a good idea. I was like, oh, you know what? I think I do like that idea better than mine. And so just like making sure that people felt safe sharing ideas, and being wrong was okay, and making sure that you never violate that trust is really important. Great. Well, thanks so much again.